Welcome to the Postgraduate Pathshala. My name is Amrita Valli. I teach at the English and Foreign Languages University in Hyderabad in the Department of Linguistics. This course is called Introduction to Linguistics, and we begin, as you might expect, with Module 1, which is called Language in the Mind, the Faculty of Language. The position on linguistics that I take in this course is that language is a form of knowledge that is represented in the mind. This is subsequent to the paradigmatic shift introduced in the 1960s by the work of Noam Chomsky about what linguistics consists of. So, what we try to do in this kind of linguistics is explain how language is learnt by every human child, and the idea is that it is a kind of knowledge which is biologically given to the human species. So it's a species specific form of language, and that's why we call it language in the mind, the faculty of language. So every human being has language. Every human being speaks a language. Every human society has language. You can imagine human societies that don't do certain things. For example, if it is a completely landlocked society, that society would not build boats. But any human society anywhere in the world will have language. That is called the universality of language. Now, babies are not born speaking a language, but a 3-year-old child speaks the language or the languages of the community into which it is born, whether that language is Assamese or Bangla or Chinese or Sinhala or Swahili or Turkish. The question that linguistics tries to answer is, how does this happen? I would suggest to you that learning to talk is like learning to walk. Children are not born walking, but at around the age of 1, every human child normally stands upright and walks. Now, just as birds fly or fish swim, human beings walk on 2 legs. Walking and talking are biological programs that unfold in the organism. Because every human child, you don't have to teach the child to walk. Although middle class parents buy walkers and we appreciate the child's efforts to stand upright and walk. But in reality, left alone, if you don't interfere with the child will do this. Now, to understand that this is something very interesting, a part of species-specific knowledge, compare the 3-year-old child with a bird like a parrot or a favorite pet like a cat or a dog that has been in that family for the same 3 years. A dog can be taught to walk upright on two legs only in the circus. A parrot can be taught to say a few words of greeting or whatever as a kind of novelty. But the child, if a child is not speaking by 3, there is reason to feel uncomfortable. There's something wrong with the child. Okay? So when you compare the child with another species which has the same exposure in the same family to language, the child acquires language in a way that the favorite pet cat or dog or bird does not acquire language. This is why we say language is species specific. Now, we are used to saying that language is learnt. We say that a child learns to walk, a child learns to talk. But you will already have realized that this is some special kind of learning, because we don't teach the child actually. We are using language here in a loose way when we say the child learns to walk or talk, just as we still say the sun rises and the sun sets. Now in today's world, I think most of us agree that it is not the sun that rises or sets. It is the earth that turns. And yet we continue to use the words rise and set for the sun as if it is the sun that moves. So similarly, we continue to use the word learn for walking and talking, although we've just tried to say that this is an unfolding bio-program in the child. So we're using the word learn in a very special way here. And this has been drawn attention to by Noam Chomsky, who tells us, we do not say that the embryo or the child learns to have arms rather than wings. So the point that Chomsky is making here is that physical growth is again an unfolding bio-program. But we have not had a tradition of saying that the human child learns to have arms, the baby bird learns to have wings. But we have a tradition of speaking about walking and talking as if they are learnt. Language in the child occurs in the absence of teaching. I think we'll try to show you that in this module. But you can think of it very commonsensically. Most children, we say, have learned the language of their society by the age of 3. Now, when you think of what else you can teach a 3-year-old, there is very little that you can teach a 3-year-old. You've just about managed to teach it if your child is going to wear socks and shoes. You've just about managed to teach it how to put on its clothes and socks and shoes and tie a knot. Its memory is very limited. So there is very little that you try to actually teach a child of 3. And yet the child of 3, in essence, knows the language or languages of its community. And that is why we say that language learning is universal and it is also uniform, because most children acquire a similar grammar with which they can communicate with the speakers of that language. There's a shared grammar. Therefore, we say that language grows in the mind. And again, if I might quote Noam Chomsky, he says, in certain fundamental respects, we do not really learn language. Grammar grows in the mind. When the heart or the visual system or other organs of the body develop to their mature form, we speak of growth rather than learning. So this is the same theme, that if we think of language as a bio-program is not taught or learnt. It unfolds in the organism. So in both physical and mental growths, the final structure attained is largely predetermined by our genetic program. On this view then, linguistics is a particular branch of cognitive psychology. Today, language and visual perception are the 2 areas of human intelligence that have been the most successfully studied in the cognitive sciences. We can think of 3 basic questions that the discipline of linguistics has to answer. And these 3 questions are: 1, what constitutes knowledge of language? 2, how is knowledge of language acquired? And 3, how is knowledge of language put to use? We've been talking now about knowledge of language in the mind. Historically, there have been 2 approaches which have tried to answer the question, how do human beings know what they know? And these 2 approaches are known as empiricism and rationalism. This is a classical debate about how the nature of human knowledge is attained. On one view, our senses access information from the world. The world is structured in a certain way, and our knowledge is built up in a way that reflects the structure of the world. On this empiricist view, knowledge is built up through sensory experience inductively, going from the particulars to the general. An alternative view, which is called the rationalist view, and which is the view that most current generative linguists subscribe to, is that the mind projects its own structures of knowledge onto the world. This view, I quote, shifts the main burden of explanation from the structure of the world to the structure of the mind. So, the mind structures the world of experience. Not only is this done to structure language, there are other kinds of mental structures which we think are given to us biologically, predetermined by birth in our species. What are these kinds of mental structures? For example, visual perception. I said that vision is one of the best explored aspects of cognitive psychology today. Now, the world comes to us on our eyes on a two-dimensional screen. But the world we see is a three-dimensional world. It has what we call depth. So depth perception is a classic example of what is done by the mind. The mind has to interpret the two-dimensional image on the retina of the eye in terms of a three-dimensional world. The mind also imposes geometrical shapes on the world. We see triangles, we see circles. All these are given to us structured by the way the visual system understands the world. We also say that notions such as cause and effect are given to us by our mind. Other notions such as whole and part. The 17th century rational philosophers were the people who first talked about all these, and they told us that these are ideas that are common to all human beings. They arise in the mind. So when you see the world is structured in terms of these ideas, whole and part, cause and effect, like and unlike, symmetrical and asymmetrical. All these notions which you now see in intelligence testing, or these kinds of cognitive tests that you normally have to do when you go into some kind of entrance examinations. These are assumed to be available to human beings. So again, to quote Chomsky, the mind provides an analysis of data as experience and a general schematism that delimits the cognitive structures developed on the basis of experience. So experience is filtered by the mind through its own schemas of knowledge. Let me now show you a picture. What do you see in this picture? Take a moment to look at it. Do you see anything? Look at it carefully. Look at it in a relaxed way. Let me tell you what it is. It is a picture of a Dalmatian sniffing on the ground. Now can you see it? See, this is a black and white picture. A Dalmatian is a black and white dog. So in the picture, the dog is hidden. You go back to the picture and you'll see the dog now. Can you see it? You can see its face in the center of the picture. It is sniffing the ground or licking something from the ground. Now, once you've seen the dog, can you now not see the dog? That becomes impossible. Once you've seen the dog, you continue to see the dog. Where is the dog? Where was the dog when you first looked at this picture? There was no dog in it. Now, when you look at this picture, the dog has appeared and it will not disappear. Your mind has imposed structure on the picture. Your mind has seen the dog. Notice that this is not a picture, I don't think you've seen this picture before. So it isn't true that you learned to see the dog there earlier. Your mind organized the black and white spots and shapes in the picture in terms of a dog and the background So now the picture resolves into a three-dimensional scene with a dog sniffing or eating something from the ground. That is how the mind structures what you see. And this is a picture taken from a book by R.L. Gregory called The Intelligent Eye. The intelligent eye. We see not with just the eye but with the mind. And it shows that we do not recognize objects only because we have seen them before, because we have never seen this particular scene before. Rather, the brain puts together or constructs from patches of light and shade a coherent view of a scene using its object recognition systems and the experience or the memory of objects. So we are now ready to consider something which we call Plato's problem, which we have referred to, which is how comes it that human beings whose contacts with the world are brief and personal and limited are nevertheless able to know as much as they do know. This is the formulation of Bertrand Russell of Plato's problem. The answer that the rationalists give and that modern linguistics gives is that learning is an awakening of pre-existent knowledge. We can know so much because in a sense we already knew it, though the data of sense are necessary to evoke and elicit this knowledge. There are pre-existent structures in the mind. Those pre-existent structures have to be stimulated and shaped. Language learning, on this view, is an instance of Plato's problem. We think of language as a mental module. When we study the body, we today do not study it as an undifferentiated whole. We know that the body consists of various organs. Now, the mind also we can think of as consisting of various mental organs. And we think of the knowledge of language as one of these mental organs of the mind. We can study the acquisition of a cognitive structure such as language more or less as we study some complex bodily organ, says Chomsky. The mind has a number of independent faculties that work together just as the organs of the body work together. The faculty of language is one of the faculties of the mind. So we come to the faculty of language. The faculty of language provides a schematism that determines quite narrowly a certain class of grammars. This schematism of a class of grammars is what we call UG, or universal grammar. It is a set of principles that all human languages which have existed in the past, human languages which may exist in the future, and all the human languages which currently exist. The idea is that all these human languages must have a particular schematism that allows them to be learnt by the human child within the first 3 years of its existence. The language faculty, as we have already said, requires appropriate stimulation to construct a grammar. There need to be triggering and shaping experiences that allow language to grow in the mind. Now, language is a species property, and yet it is not true that everybody speaks only one language or the same language. Human societies vary in the languages they speak. We can think of this on the analogy of physical variation. Our skin color is not the same across the human species. Hair color is not the same across the human species. But biologically, the human species is the same. So similarly, we can think of language as allowing for variation within narrow limits. So we think of certain principles that all languages need to conform to, and we think that languages can be allowed to vary along certain parameters. So this is called the principles and parameters theory of universal grammar. Language is one of the faculties of the mind. It interfaces with other faculties of the mind, other mental systems. For example, if I speak something to you, your attention is on the content of what I'm saying. That means you undergo some kind of conceptual change because of what I'm saying to you today through the medium of language. So language interfaces with our thoughts, our conceptual systems, our beliefs. All these are separate parts of the mind. Our intentions. I can intend to make you do something through language. I can ask you to go and open the door. I can ask you to believe something, as I'm trying to do today. I can persuade you to do something. So language interfaces through all these mental systems. And these we now refer to as the conceptual intentional interface of language. Language also needs a medium through which it is instantiated. Most human beings today are familiar with the oral aspect of language. That is, I speak and you listen. But not all human beings can hear. But such human beings can develop a form of language which is called sign language. And it can be shown that sign language has properties which are common with all languages. Sign language is a language, it has the structure of language. So in the case of sign language, the gestural system serves as the medium through which language is expressed. So these media are called the articulatory perceptual interface of language. It can be oral, it can be visual through sign. So, to summarize what we have said here today, we've said that language is a form of knowledge in the human mind. It is universal and uniform. Every child acquires language. Every child acquires language to the extent that it can share the same grammar with other speakers of its community. The learning of language is an instance of Plato's problem. It is learnt with minimal exposure, but the system that is learnt is quite rich, as we shall see when we go further into linguistics. And therefore, linguistics today is part of the rationalist view of the world, that the mind imposes structure on the world. Other structures that we've imposed on the world consist of geometrical structure, the interpretation of space in terms of 3 dimensions and so on, the interpretation of events in terms of cause and effect, the interpretation of objects in terms of whole and part. All these are also ways in which we structure the world through our mind. Language learning, therefore, is part of Plato's problem of how we know what we know. Thank you.